then we'll go right to it.
Okay.
But essentially what we want to do today is explore how our brains tell us stuff that's not there and how it influences how we think about other people, and particularly how we come to think of race as a real thing, even though by all measures it's not, but it can feel like it's just as real as gravity. But when we scratch and sniff, as they say, we find that there is no there. Are you there, Carol? These things can get kind of tricky when you think you have it worked out, and then the way that you got it to work last time doesn't work this time. So,
I'm muted. Okay, so I just have to share my screen and then pull up the video here.
okay, there we go. You can skip the ad.
I thought I had skipped through all the ads.
The sound is, I'm not getting the sound. There's no sound.
Is your personal sound turned up all the way?
I'm sorry, I can't hear what you guys are saying. Are you guys hearing the sound?
No.
Any ideas how to fix that? Because it's really loud for us.
There is another way to try to. There is another way to try to solve the problem, which is just to put the link in to the chat box and we all go to it individually.
Okay, let's see here.
There's a thing that says turn on original sound. Would that help?
Yeah, probably. I can't see what controls you guys have. The host has a different set of controls than I have.
Where does it say that, Ryan? I don't see that.
On my Mac, it's in the left-hand corner of the screen.
Of which screen? The Zoom screen or the YouTube screen?
The main Zoom screen.
Okay, if you're a co-host, Ryan, can you just do it?
Possibly. Do I have that permission?
Well, I can make you the host, Ryan. Okay, so you're the host, so you should be able to try getting it to go. You'll have to share your screen then if you get it up.
Yeah, go to the share screen. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just gonna grab the link here. Sorry about this, folks. Little
That's all right.
technical difficulties.
How's Fedora today?
Grammarly helps make.
There we go.
I'm
That's
fine,
it.
thank you very much. I see that we're connecting, so I'll go away again.
Okay, all right. We'll get back to you. Okay, let's try to share that screen again. I always got that good.
It must seem threatening, even reprehensible, for someone to hammer away at the very foundations of what many people fortify themselves in. So many of us are hypnotized by the mass hallucination of race that everything we see seems to support the concept of race. I've made the point that no school of science supports the concept of race, but your observations filtered through your common sense tell you that people are different. Not necessarily better, as some claim, but certainly different. So, you ask, if there is no such thing as race, why are blacks good at music and sports while whites are good at things that require thought and discipline? Well, life is full of illusions, and race is just one of them. The moon looks bigger on the horizon. People trying to figure this out call it the moon illusion. But if you hold an aspirin at arm's length, the big moon on the horizon will suddenly shrink. So the idea that it has something to do with atmospheric optics is clearly false. It all happens in our brain. It's still not certain why it happens, but the takeaway here is that what we see is clearly an illusion. In a disco, it seems that the lights are flashing to the music, but what's usually happening is the lights are just flashing at random, and our brains pay attention to the flashes that go with the musical beat and discount the rest. This is referred to as selective viewing. Selective viewing is what causes us to view admirable things done by members of our own group as somehow a reflection on the values and worth of the whole group, while seeing anything bad done by someone in the group as a deed by one person for which only that person is responsible. When, on the other hand, it is another group, we will ignore or dismiss the admirable deeds of an individual as a fluke, but hold the whole group responsible for individual reprehensible acts. And we will use this as proof of the other group's inferiority. I call this thought process the ratchet effect. And there is a mass media industry built on supporting this. We can accept racial profiling if the terrorists are profiled as Arab looking, but not if they're Irish looking, unless of course you're in Britain. If a person outside of our own group gets a great job, we easily dismiss it as a gift from affirmative action. Even patents have been rejected because the patent inspector did not believe the person with that color of skin had the intellectual capacity to invent. We give Columbus credit for discovering America when clearly there were some other people who beat him here by about 10,000 years. And we certainly don't mention that, by his own account, he treated the local people so cruelly that mothers took to killing their babies to spare them the horrors he was committing on the local people. We make a big deal of the Vikings' navigational skills when Polynesians performed much greater navigational feats with much less technology much earlier. We know these things, but keeping them from our school children and out of the mass media helps preserve the myth that only certain people can do great things and therefore have the right, even the obligation, to rule the subgroups. And the hallucination is so deep that even those oppressed by it cling to it like cockleburs in matted wool. So what I'm asking you to do, if you dare, is to hold that aspirin at arm's length while looking at the moon. The moon will still be the moon. But you will be able to see through the illusion, see the moon as it really is.
Okay, so there's nothing else. We don't have to go through the link. We can kill it now. I don't know how the sound sounded to you guys, but it was horrible to me. I could hardly understand, and I know what I'm saying. I could hardly understand what it was. How did it sound to you guys? Because
It was to understand what you were saying.
You could?
I couldn't hardly understand what you were saying.
Yeah, I couldn't, and I know what I was saying, and it was hard for me. So the link to it is in the chat. So I will encourage you. I won't take more time with it now, but I will encourage you to go and take a look at it. There are some other. That's part of a whole album. So that there's more stuff there. Yeah. So essentially, what the can you hear me? Okay. You guys can all hear me? Okay. Okay. So essentially, what the piece was saying was that we kind of suffer under an illusion that what we see is the real thing. And what our brains do is to assemble data and then make a picture out of it. And the result of that is that what we see is not often what actually is. We kind of make it up in our heads. That opens us up to the possibility that whatever we call it in computers, garbage in, garbage out, meaning that the information that you get, you make up a picture from that. Most of us don't have very many experiences with people outside of a close-knit group of people that we interact with. Some of us don't meet anyone on any level very more than, let's say, 150 people in a year. That's probably pushing it. The result is we don't really have a way to know or understand people that we think of as different. You put on top of that other people trying to create these little boxes in order to organize people, often for their own dubious agendas, into groups, us and the others. In this country, right, it got started during a period in which people were trying to make sense of all of these different groups around the world. People get on boats, you go around the world, and you notice something very interesting is as you go around the world from Europe, you see people who look like people from, let's say, Papua New Guinea look like people you saw in Africa. People in one part in South America kind of look like people you saw in Asia, but you never see any people that look like you. That's a kind of a frightening, can be a kind of a frightening experience. So at the same time, you have people who are trying to categorize all these other different animals that they're seeing, trees that they're seeing, landscape that they're seeing in the first time. So there's a sense of we have to organize all of this in order to understand it. Well, it develops into people, long story short, people are trying to organize people into something they call races or categories. At one time, there was actually about 300 different races. And then people started paring it down. That was a little cumbersome. They keep paring it down. And then it was like 6 was around for a long time. And then we got to 3 and then went back to 4. And then, but the reason that it was changing is because it wasn't based on anything objective. And people kept trying to find something objective to base the concept of race on, but they were always unable to do so. The result is what is one race keeps shifting back. You read all of the research in air quotes and commentaries, and people were arguing about, well, does this group belong in this group? Or, we said that all the people had long noses, but we found this other group over here, they have long noses, or they would say that they have blonde hair. But then you get to Australia and you find that people who are very dark have straight blonde hair. Now that just messes up your whole system. And you find people that you didn't expect to have blue eyes, but suddenly do. It's like the black swan thing where people thought all swans were white until they got to Australia and realized that they were actually black swans. And in all other ways, they were exactly like the white swans that people knew about, but in those people's minds, swans were always white because that was the only ones they ever saw. So add to that the necessity of creating let's say a rationale for dominating and treating people cruelly so that you could use them for labor that you felt you needed but didn't want to pay for. Then you suddenly have the basis to instill the concept of race very deep and very complex, so deep and complex that people think that it's a real thing. You try to make it into a reality. People did this in many different ways. They made sure that, let's say, in the early days of printing, not so many people had a printing press. And before the printing press, the only books were ones that people copied by hand, or sometimes they had type, like in China, or in some cases they had clay tablets, and you could make a plate and press clay into a tablet and have, you have a little pen that or instrument that you could write in the clay, bake it, and now that was a permanent record of whatever transaction you were trying. But there was no wide dissemination of information. Once there was a press, though, now people started to make pictures in the press. They started to write things and disseminate this information. And so now you have people who you can spread ideas, and on top of that, you have a pulpit. You have people who go to church. And so if you can put this stuff into religion, now it seems really real, because it's like God said it's true. God didn't say, I'm not saying God said it's true. It's just saying you can use that to justify the ideas that they're racist, so much to the point that you will see in the Bible, the saint, what is it? What was it? The one that's used all the time, most of the time, you will see references to Abraham and his race. Well, there were no races when Abraham was around. Nobody had the concept of race. Just like in the Bible, you will see things like the word corn. There was no corn until people reached the Americas. There was no corn outside of the Americas until that time. But you will see words like that in the Bible that people approximated and made up. The result is that people started to think that this is a real thing. It's natural. They thought it was natural. If you don't have any experience with people outside of the ones that's in your village, then who's to say? How would you know? How would you know that that these people are really the same? It's only in the last, let's say, 50 years, being liberal, but probably more accurately the last 20 or 30 years, that people have actually been doing research to get underneath this idea of race. In this country, one of the things that sparked it was the census. The Census Department needed a way so that when their census takers went out to do a census to take the data, they needed to ask, what race are you? And so they needed to be able to tell the census worker, if this person has this, 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 and this, you mark this box. People would call the Census Department and say, I don't know which race should I be in? How do you determine? I don't know what race I am. What race am I? They needed a way so that they could put, and at some point on their website, but at that point, I don't think they had website for the Census Department, but they needed a way to be consistent so that when they say this is a Black person, that was a thing. And so you knew that that was a Black person. So they went to the American Anthropological Association. And my understanding is they said, here's $10 million in 10 years. We want you to tell us how we can categorize the races so that we can use it in a practical form. Well, fast forward 10 years, $10 million spent. And the conclusion of the American Anthropological Association was, we can't do it because it's not a thing. There is no category, there's nothing that we can say about any so-called race that all the people in there have, but nobody else has. All the characteristics that you find, that you say is in this race, if you go and look, you can find some of those characteristics in race B, C, D, or whatever, however you want to split it up, you're going to find those characteristics. And so there's nothing objective that we can point to in order to say this race is this. I have been posing that question to the people who propose that there in fact is such a thing as race for about 30 years now, and no one else has come up with it. And I had a financial motive. Because if they could tell me what that was, then I would go to the Census Department and collect my $10 million. You know what I mean? I just cut them out of the deal and then go right to the Census Department. But no, so far, nobody's come up with that. And if you have that, I will let you on a secret. You could go and collect that money from the Census Department. But chances are you can't. Because right down to the DNA, people have found they can't do it. You will see these things that say, well, we can tell you what race or what country or something you're in. It's all bogus. The people who are in genetics, it's like fingernails on the chalkboard, those kind of things. Because all it does is say we have a pool of these genes that we find that's more prevalent over here, let's say in Ireland. And given that you're in the United States, there's a coin toss, better than coin toss chance that your people came from there, because we don't find that cluster anywhere except in Australia among Aboriginals, and except in a small village in Canton, and except in a group of people in Botswana. But other than that, it's mostly in Ireland. So you don't really know. And even if you can trace your ancestry back, then where did they come from? You know, it's like people say, well, I'm German. Well, the Germans didn't auto-germinate in Germany. You know, they came from someplace. And most of the people in South Dakota, for example, they actually came from Russia. They came from Germany through Russia, then came here. So you think, well, why do you say you're German? You know, and if you say, well, we're going to skip Russia, why did you skip Russia? And if you say, well, we originally, before that, we came from Germany. Well, you didn't start in Germany. How Germany is, as a country, it's a younger country than the United States. There was no Germany when they started all this race stuff. So people will use those kind of services, but the services really are kind of like just take advantage of people's need for identity. They want to have a story. And I say without living, they want to sing the blues without paying the dues. They didn't do anything, so they want to like claim my ancestors did something, so that must, that explains my behavior or something,
I have to
Identity.
interject, Lauren.
Hmm.
This is
who's what?
Fedora speaking.
Hmm.
I do have to interject. I'm a geneticist, and I kind of hear what you're saying about it certainly isn't about race. Maybe people understand or take to understand that 23andMe or Ancestry.com or whatever is providing that something on race. But I think overall the population understands that it's about an ethnicity, and ethnicity being very different from race. It goes to culture and those kinds of things, which are defined by where people came from, and what they've kept from where they came from. But anyway, so I just want, I don't want it to be left that those companies are all bogus because they're trying to tell you about race, or they're trying, that really bothers me significantly, because I actually utilize some of the data that's obtained to look also at medical conditions and so forth. And I do want to say, certainly the ascribing of ethnicity is based on what databases these companies have. So originally, you may get, like in the first uses of it, because the databases were limited, you could have been told that you were from the Sahara region or something, because they can't tell you what tribes or anything, because they don't have any databases on those people. So they can't really zoom in on that. So anyway, I'll let you proceed, but I really couldn't just let that slide by. Like,
I really appreciate that you did interject, and you bring up a very good point, and one that should be clarified. My objection is that they base it on genetics, and they base it on genetic pooling. If they said, look, we went back and we corroborated all of this research on lots of things and trace you particularly back to a tribe, then I would have no objection. But when you take a pool of genes that you find that's predominant, is very prevalent in one place, and extrapolate that to the fact that everybody who has this is from this area, then it even has no meaning in terms of ethnicity, because it could have been someplace else. For example, there are lots of places where, let's say, you will find this pool of genes in Ireland, as I said, and then also in the Philippines. Oh gosh, where is the thing? Hold on a second, I'm sorry.
well, while our speaker has left, I'd like to, he's back.
Oh, that's okay. I just had to get rid of that phone because I had one in my pocket. Okay, so.
Okay.
Okay, just to finish the thought, the prevalence of genes cannot ascribe even ethnicity. For example, if they didn't know anything about you, where you came from, where you're sending that from, and you just drop that into them, they can tell you where those pools are, but they couldn't tell you which one, or they couldn't really be accurate as to where yours came from. In the
challenge. I challenge. Okay, first begin. There's what's called a genome-wide association studies. It's called GWAS. And we go in and we're looking at the presence of, as you say, you say genes, but it's actually not specifically a set of genes, but DNA markers, which you have to be very careful because there's selection pressures that could end up removing some genes from the database, from the whatever, because there are, I don't want to get too technical about bottlenecks and loss of generations and so forth. So if a set disappears, and then it shows up somewhere else, there are ways that we distinguish between the traveled ones, et cetera, et cetera. There's just that with computer technology and the databases that we have, we can track these things. And there's also called mutational changes. So we can actually, there are phylogenetic trees that allow us to say when particular genes mutated, how long ago they mutated and stuff like that. And this could become a whole lecture on genetics, and I don't want to be rude. But know that I don't accept those things. I do accept the fact that ethnicity cannot be ascribed to genes. And I don't accept the idea of race either. We are all human race. We're looking at the variations on the theme of humanity. And maybe we can say that ethnicity, except ethnicity also brings in culture. So I could be a Black person who is, you are a Black person, but your culture is very different from mine. And I'm also a Black person. So, and I also have all kinds of Europeans, in fact, in my bloodline, which will be different from yours, which then, if we want to get nuance, then it would be very difficult to ascribe ethnicity. It makes it easy to say, you're a Black person, Haley is a white woman, Carolyn, and so forth. And immediately we know we're talking about melanin content, and that they are, and I actually would prefer people say European American rather than just white versus African American and African American. If you're going to use African American, you should say European American, but that's a whole nother story, and I can go on and on, so I'll stop now.
I really appreciate your input. That's the whole point of this, is not to, just accept what I'm saying, okay? It's for discussion. So I invite everyone to please chime in. Let me just address the ethnic part, okay? One, I would say, first of all, I should say, it sounds like we actually agree on this. We're not disagreeing. That's the first thing. But let me give you a story about the ethnicity, okay? So back in the day when I was doing reporting and I was doing something in the jungles of Laos, this girl came up to me in the marketplace and she said, "Oh, what's your name?" She wanted to, just suddenly wanted to just know everything about me. And I was, of course, surprised because that's not usually what happens in a village in Laos. But she said, "Would you come and I want you to meet my sister?" And I said, "Sure." She said, "Well, why don't I invite because she was with another young lady. She said, why don't you come to our house for dinner tonight?" And I'm thinking, okay, cool. I'm a reporter, so I'm inquisitive, So I go to this place, and her sister, it turns out, was, let's say, we would say she was African, okay? Because she looked like she might have came out of Botswana or something like that. She did not look anything like you would expect someone to look in Laos. And this girl picked up on that we were both dark, and she just thought, "Oh, you should meet my sister." Now, this girl, it turns out the reason that she was there was because the French Foreign Legion had been there. Both her parents had been disappeared. She was in an orphanage. And the friends that she had in those orphanages turned to more or less, as they put it, her sisters. And after they got 18, they couldn't stay in the orphanage anymore, and they decided to be supporting of each other. And this is the story I got as I got to know those girls. This girl spoke Laotian. All of her movie stars were Laotian. I mean, all of their young girls, and they had their movie stars, and the singers. That all of those were Laotian. She knew Laotian dance, and that's the only kind of dances she knew. In every way except her appearance, this girl was Laotian. Do we say that she's ethnic Laotian? Because everything else, she had no idea of her parents. She had no idea of like what, where her parents came from. She could clearly see she looked different and probably in some ways got treated different. But in terms of like what she was living every day and the people around her and her contacts and the people who treated her like family, they were all Laotian. I've had a number of experiences like that I could regale you with as a result from traveling around the world and also living in San Francisco. That makes me think that even the sense that we have of that ethnicity is something that's solid, it's shaken for me.
I agree with you that ethnicity, she is a Laotian as far as I am concerned, but as far as she is concerned, that is the question. Who we are is what we say we are, not what other people ascribe us to be.
Okay. I think we're on the same page. I would say that there is, some people would say, okay, look, it's just a matter of like we're deciding, and it should be only that. The problem is like we often think that it's real, so it actually gets into something you mentioned before about a fedora, about medical things, okay? So you can see a number of studies, and you will even hear about a number of studies where people will say, they didn't do any studies, or they did these studies only on Black people, or they did none on Black people, et cetera, because they want the studies to show, to reinforce what they think are actual natural lines, okay? They turn out to be economic lines, but that's a whole other story. But I can give you some actual anecdotal stories about how the idea that there's something medical about that, about race, that really trips us up. There have been a number of people, including one doctor. If you go on TED Talk, there's some TED Talks that actually address this, where there's a doctor who talks about the problems that she has with people thinking that race is a thing in the medical field when it isn't. And so they often misdiagnose because they are looking at it from from what they think is a racial group. A personal story, my sister had been sick for years and years, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. And at one point, the doctor said, I've been looking at your chart, and he had a big, thick chart, she said, and I've been looking at your chart, and it doesn't make any sense. All these symptoms that you have, they're not coming together. And the only thing that it seems it could be, it can't be, because only Native Americans have that, right? The problem was he was looking at my sister, but he never asked her about her ancestry. He looked at her and determined that she was, quote, a Black person. Because if he had looked into her ancestry, you would find out, well, genetically, she actually could have this because she's about as much Native as she is anything else. But the idea that we can look at someone and say, oh, they're this or that, or even our own ideas of who we are, it's like, what do we base it on? So that said, I want now to throw it out to you, because there's so much that could be said about this. So I want to throw it out to you guys for your response to the concept that there is such a thing as race. Do you all take drugs or something?
Stuff. I have a lot to say, but I'm waiting for somebody else to get a chance.
Yeah.
Lawrence, do you want to start calling on people?
Yeah. Yeah. Carolyn.
I think Ryan should go first.
It doesn't really matter.
I'd like to ask Alphonse. He's going to be one of our festival presenters, and he hasn't. I don't think he's joined us before. What he thinks.
Well, I'm really here to listen more than anything to understand the format and the kinds of discussions. But I will tell you one other element that brought up, or rather two other elements that I've been thinking about during this discussion, is that the way we define culture, but more specifically, I've been thinking about the research that Luckman and Berger did on the social construction of. And that's really the big one that I'm paying attention to, that we have socially constructed a lot of the notions about what race, gender, and other matters are. So I'm not going to go into the depths of that research in sociology, but that really is where I am. And then the whole big related to culture, you know, how it's passed down from one generation to another, is another element that I think needs to be factored into the discussion. Clearly, the discussion needs to be nuanced rather than broad strokes. One other comment that I'll make, and then I'll shut up. You know, what COVID-19 has sort of revealed about health conditions of different groups in different communities, I think could be another vector to this discussion. How real are comorbid conditions are being revealed by this particular virus? So as I said, there's a whole nuanced way of entering into this discussion. But finally, I'll say this. I'm looking at the notion of human connection. How is it that we are connected is really important to me. And whether or not we will be able to construct our different sociological existences, I don't know. I'd like to think that we could in some time period. But right now, the social constructions are pretty well established.
I would agree that the social constructs are very well established. And I would also point out that they were established and they can be destroyed. Just like what was before was destroyed, and it's an artificial construct. That's the important thing to remember, that just like it was constructed, it can be deconstructed. Now, we have only just begun to even have this discussion. So there probably isn't a magic wand that we can wave and it all goes away. But once we understand that it is completely artificial, that we've made it up, we support it, and it's to our own peril, then it seems to me that it's incumbent on us, or it makes us responsible for deconstructing it. And I guess my interest in this topic is engaging people in the activity of deconstructing the whole notion that there is race. And I will say that it's been going on for like, 250 to 300 years now. So it's not going to be this weekend that we do this, but we could start today. So I'd like to hear from someone else. Deb, you haven't said anything. Are you there, Deb? Deb may be gone.
I have something to say.
Go ahead.
I like it. I totally agree with the idea of the deconstruction of of some of these social constructs, not only race, but sexual identity. However, it has to be done within certain context. We can't just, and also we need to be able to describe what we see. Yes, the idea that color is being colorblind is absolutely repulsive to me when somebody says they're colorblind. It's like, what the heck? How do you not see me? I would like to, when we look on a garden, there are flowers, and we observe that different flowers have different colors, different shapes, different whatever. And that is, to me, how we should see the human race. They're different, not that they all look the same. So get rid of that color blindness. We are, so it is a matter of us seeing each other, how we look, what color we are, all these things, but not having that influence how we interact with each other. That I don't put you at the back of the line because you happen to be darker of color or whatever. Given that, then we have to be able to, I think we have to be very careful. And I should stop. I mean, I can go on and on. The biology that's associated with race is important. There are connections there. It's selective pressure that allowed for the sickle cell disease to manifest itself. It is not like, here is this one mutation, a single change in a single gene causing the change in the shape of the red blood cell, which saved many lives. So we see sickle cell as, oh my God, you have this disease. But when it started, that was a survival mechanism. The parasite cannot replicate within a sickled red blood cell. So having that sickle cell gene meant those people, they had to be heterozygote, meaning one wild type and one mutant. They had to have that to survive. If you have both sickle cell, it's over. And if you have both wild type or regular red blood cells, you will die because the parasite is able to multiply quite rapidly. So, we have to pay attention that there is biology behind it. And regarding the question of the COVID-19, I particularly like the data point, and forgive me if I sound, however I sound, that it's a data point. But Herman Cain serves as a data point. He was not socioeconomically deprived, okay? So the whole idea that Blacks and brown people and all are coming down with COVID because their socioeconomic status and that is it, just gets me like, you guys are not paying attention. A lot of the people who have died of COVID are those who were exposed, and the janitors, the nurses, the cleanup crew. And these people are mainly people of color and of a socioeconomic class, because that's where their jobs are and they're not paid very well. But it's not that Black people are all poor and whatever, and that's how they're coming down with it, or because of their diet, that's how they're all dying of this disease. They are being exposed to the disease. And here we have this socioeconomically well-off multi-millionaire, probably billionaire, I don't know his wealth, died of it. Why? Exposure. Anyway, so I just wanted to throw that in with the COVID-19 stuff and comorbidity topic that was raised. But yes, there's a need to clear up the construction. I should be able to consider myself whatever I consider myself. And in fact, I do consider myself as having a lot of male properties, because males are supposedly very assertive and all these things. And since I'm a female who's assertive and all of that, then I'm displaying a lot of masculine tendencies. So those are the things we have to get rid of. That kind of labeling without losing track of the fact that race, until we get a better term for it, is the link. Is you look at me, I'm a Black person. That's it. I mean, until you can give us another term to use that is not burdened with everything else, I guess we will have to use that. I would prefer to see that the negative response to race be what is dismantled or removed, or where the efforts are spared. Thank you. I'm done.
Okay. Okay, so let me go back and address the issue of sickle cell, because I think it will give you and give me an opportunity to show how the whole idea of biological connection to the sociological designation of race is completely bogus. Sickle cell is not just, quote, for Black people. You can find it all over. It's where the Anopheles mosquito is. You will find that disease because they're the ones that transfer it. You will find that there's a response to it, and the Anopheles mosquitoes and a higher, let's say a sufficient amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. We normally think that there's 20% of oxygen in the atmosphere, but in certain cases where there's lots of forest, there's 30%. So if you have a high percent of oxygen, the Anopheles mosquito, they come together to support the sickle cell microorganism.
I challenge the term, there is no sickle cell organism. There's a mosquito that transfers a parasite that can grow. It's not a sickle cell thing. It has nothing. It will grow whether you have sickle cell. It will grow in red blood cells.
Mm. But the body reacts to that to create the sickle cell.
No,
it
no.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
No.
Please explain.
The gene encoding that particular protein in the red blood cells, if modified, which it has before, because your child is in the germ cells, because the children have the modification, you do not have to be exposed for it to happen. It isn't a transcription factor or translational or an environmentally stimulated anything. This is your genes. This is in there, coded, passed on to your child, to the next child, to the next child. That is why you have some Blacks here in America, and even some people who could pass as white, but who happen to have Black ancestry, where the gene was passed along, who are not exposed to malaria, but are suffering the consequences of the effect of having the sickled red blood cell.
Well, I have the data. I don't think I want to like go and sort of like find the websites and stuff right now.
No.
But I will say that there are other populations in the world that we don't normally call Black, and those people also have large populations with sickle cell. That was my only point.
That is absolutely correct. And that is because that population has in their genome the mutated form of that particular gene. And one can even sometimes use such things as markers for where some people come from or what they might have. Just like your sister, where the doctor was like, well, this is only found with Native American folks. If he had looked at her genetics, looked at her genes, he would have gotten the information he needed to provide her with the necessary medication, not going on just her phenotype.
Mhm. So I guess in a way, I think we're saying the same thing. My point here is that there is no biological basis, at least none that anybody has ever explained, and I'd be very open to anybody who can point to it. There's no biological basis for the sociological construct of race. The two are completely separate. There are no biological things to say. For example, if you found some blood or some tissue, you couldn't look at that, take the genome and say, this is a Black person.
You're absolutely correct. And that's why we have to talk about phenotype, morphology, and genotype. Those are specific words that tell you specific things. So you say, phenotypically, Lawrence looks like a Black man.
But what is that?
Genotypic, you're a Black person or person of dark complexion due to high melanin content. And the degree of the melanin content determines whether you look like you or you look like me, which you can't see because of the flowers, and so forth, variations, even all the way to Carolyn and Jennifer and so forth, because I see Carolyn's red hair. And so that is an indication of her pigmentation, which is different from Jennifer's pigmentation. In the conversation, I don't have to say, well, the red-headed girl, Carolyn, and the brunette, Jennifer, whose ancestors would have come from X number of places, a waste of words to discuss, I see. So anyway, the point is, phenotypically, there's Lawrence. Genotypically, there is Lawrence. Culturally, there is Lawrence. And then socioeconomically, there is Lawrence. These are all ways in which we can define ourselves. End of story, sorry.
Okay, so, you know, you bring up some very interesting points, and I'm very appreciative that you actually challenge, because most people sort of like go along, oh, I don't know, you know, but at least it gives us an opportunity to have a discussion, okay? And I'm very appreciative of that. I would like to respond to, you know, and I know we're really running out of time now, but I would like to respond to a few things that you brought up, okay? So we have a need, as you point out, people have a need to categorize things. That's kind of how we put the world together, especially if we grew up in a society that developed out of the Greco-Roman ideas of all the parts put together to try to describe the whole. Whereas today we know through the study of synergy that the sum of the parts is more than the whole. You know, it's like all of those things put together, they become something different. That said, when we describe people by what any of those measurements that you describe, let's say phenotypic, if you say Lawrence is dark, how dark? Because there are no lines that here's black and here's brown. We talk about black, brown, red, but you have never seen a black person, because black is the absence of, because the black is the absence of light. And if you look closely, especially under a microscope, even this black shirt is either blue or brown. People don't become black. So, and people are certainly not red, and unless they're jaundice, they're not yellow, and unless they are albino or some other illnesses, they are not white. Those are
figuratively used. Nobody
that's where
really...
I'm going. That's where I'm going. That's where I'm going. Okay. Those are figurative words that they are stand-ins. The problem is that they stand in for things that we just subjectively put. And when we make those separations, we say we define ourselves as us and the others. The moment you have the others, we are left with trying to describe the others. Typically, we don't know the others, so we make up stuff. That is the basis for racism, is that we don't know and the other people don't know, so we just say, well, generally speaking, right? And I've done this experiment where I've lined up a whole bunch of people in a classroom, a whole bunch of students in a classroom. And I said, I want you to like organize yourself in terms of like who's lightest and all the way to the darkest. Okay. And then I said, okay, now as I go down this line, tell me when people stop becoming white and they become yellow or brown or whatever line you want to make, and where they become black and where they become whatever other group you want. And it's the first time, in fact, it's the first time that people have actually had a chance to look at that often. And I've had students come up to me as much as 10 years later and comment that that's the first time that they had ever realized that there's no lines of black, brown, etc. There are gradations of melanin. So the question is, even if I'm phenotypically, what is the phenotype that I could objectively describe of whatever group that you want? I mean, we could call it black, we could call it the UBSDA. It won't matter. The effect is the same.
Well, it does matter, because if you're doing, I find it difficult to understand that nobody would understand that it's a gradation, since it's very clear across the world with all organisms. There's a gradation from whether you want to go north to south, or actually it goes from the tropics north and south. There is a gradation because the melanin gene, the melanocytes, are stimulated by the sun to produce more melanin. So you can imagine if you are exposed to more sunlight, less sunlight, whatever, you're going to be showing shades of what you are capable of producing. Because certainly if your melanocytes can only produce X amount of melanin, there's no way you're going to all of a sudden become as dark as somebody from deep Somalia or somewhere like that, who've been born there and have never left there. They are of a particularly dark hue. To say that you don't see that would be ridiculous. And then similarly with the Iceland and Greenland and those Celtic nations, do not see that their pigmentation is, their melanin content is limited even to influencing the color of their hair and the shades of their eyes. I mean, there are just some things that are scientific. What I think we should aim for is not to say who is darker than whom and where the line stops and all that kind of stuff, but can you find me in a crowd? If you're looking for me in a crowd and I am at the farmer's market, I would say to you, you can find me at the farmer's market. I will be wearing a red shirt. Now, if you already know that Fedora is of dark hue, you will be looking for a woman of dark hue with a red shirt. If you don't know me from anybody, I can say to you, I will be the black woman with the red shirt on, you know, or something like that. I wouldn't say I'm 5'7", because there are many people who are 5'7". Do I want to be found or not? You know, but anyway, so I'm sorry, see, I get there because there's so much. We have to differentiate between classification for health reasons, etc. And that's so important. It's just like men and women. The research that was done on heart disease was done in the beginning solely on men. Black men, white men, whatever men, in between men, whatever hue. The point is, the symptoms of a heart attack in men is so very different from that in women. And the NIH actually had to come out and say, you will begin to include women in the research for which the drug companies actually give medication. So you've been giving women medication that doesn't work. And similarly with race, whether you want to call it something else, certain drugs are contraindicated for African Americans, people of African American descent. I know it as a fact, and I can tell you that story, and there's been research on that as well. So we have to realize there are selection pressures that went into creating us or getting us to where we are with our modular gene nature, which means that even though Lawrence and I may have similar pigmentation, and if Lawrence and I were both male, there is medication that would work for Lawrence that won't work for me, and definitely won't work for Woodard and all the other guys. But that's a whole other topic.
I will offer this. I am not saying that between you and I, that there are no differences, right? I am not saying that between individuals, there are no differences. What I'm proposing is that any artificial groups, which is what social constructs are, those differences are manufactured and they're fake. They do not pan out. I will offer this. There are people who can accept an organ transplant from a person who is from a quote different race, but they cannot get the same organ transplant from a sibling.
That's exactly correct.
Okay,
and
so
that goes to science, which we can discuss, but won't right now.
Mm.
But it has to do with antigens and all that kind of stuff. Even siblings cannot. But remember the recombinations that go on that allows your brother not to look like you. If you have a brother, you can look on him. He doesn't look like you because there are recombinations that occur between your parents' genomes that gave rise to a different personality. Otherwise, all our siblings would be clones, just born at different times. Mm-hmm. And that difference is manifested all the way through the proteins that coat our organs, and thus does not allow for your brother to give you an organ necessarily. It might, but it might not as well.
Yeah, but oddly, somebody who doesn't look like you, not in your quote same race, oddly, they don't have any of the rejection factors. To me, that says that if I can change an organ with you, that says to me that's an objective measure that we are similar.
That's absolutely correct. You're similar with respect to that particular antigen. It may be that something else won't work. See, the recombinations and the possibilities. I mean, human development is just incredible. The possibilities are so strong. That's why the transplant and organ donor banks are open to everyone so that we can find who somewhere on this earth might be able to give us one of their organs if we need one. And so yes, it doesn't have anything to do with your race, but I wouldn't be using that to find you in the marketplace.
No.
But so there we go to genotype, which is what I'd use to find an organ donor. What is your genotype?
Okay, so I'm not sure we really disagree. When I hear what you're saying, I think that in my case, I'm approaching it like, look, if the thing is not a thing, in other words, if you cannot objectively describe it, I find it productive to build sociological constructs on it, to determine like, okay, you look this way, so I expect you to be something. So
I agree with you.
Okay, so essentially that's my proposal here. I would never propose that two individuals are clones and they look alike. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the differences, the group, you can find different kinds of things. First, you see me, but why not divide people, for example, by fingerprints? We have classifiable fingerprints that are classifiably different to the point that computers can match them in FBI files. So we can say that there are categories of fingerprints. Why not divide people by fingerprints?
Well, the thing about it is you and I cannot go around checking people's fingerprints. What we're looking for is community, cultural, something that we can, what we're looking for is to disengage or to separate how I assume, what I assume about your character based on how you look, which is your phenotype.
Is that a good thing?
We absolutely have to do that.
Why?
But at the same, because it's wrong.
Oh, I
It's
see.
wrong.
Oh, you're saying, you're agreeing with me that we should not do that.
We cannot continue to say that all white people are the same, because they're not. We cannot continue to say that all Black people are the same, because they're not. And when we say the same, we're talking about behavior, or violence. Those people are violence. Those people are all thieves. Those people are whatever. Those are the things that we have to trash and separate away from phenotype. There's no association there. But we have to accept the fact that the phenotype is a good indication of hereditary, of genes, of where your great-great-grandparents once came from. Your ancestors did not come out of Celtic regions, of Iceland and so forth. I can look at you and I will say that affirmatively. And if your family told you that story, I would have to tell you, Guy, you need to go visit the Caribbean and Africa and so forth, and you will see people who look like you. You're not from Iceland.
Would you say that I'm a Blackfoot? When you saw me, would you trace my ancestry back to Blackfoot?
Well, I don't have my picture up because I'd asked you, can you see the Carib in me?
That's what I'm saying. It's like
exactly,
if you say, well, you can. What is it that you can tell?
But the point is, the phenotype has, we are classifying based on making things simpler to work with. I ran into, there's this man, Lawrence, if you want to find him, look for a dark complexioned man with a gray mustache and beard, kind of balding on the top. I don't have to tell him how much Native American you have, or whether you came from South Sudan or the Sahara or anything like that. We have to have a way to define you so that you're found in a crowd. That's it.
So
you find it. I'm sorry. At the same time, we have to not say just because Lawrence looked like the way I described him means that he is uneducated or his mother was a single mother, his family's single mother, and they didn't know how to raise their children and all that garbage. Because that is, as you said, in the beginning, about categorizing not objective, a rationale of trying to deal. When you see you, how does my brain interpret you? I am saying there is the interpretation, which we gotta fix, and the fact of what you look like, so I can find you in a crowd. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so I'm not disagreeing that you want to find me in a crowd, or you can describe me. What I'm saying is, like, individuals can be described, groups cannot, except that we just make up things, because within that group, whatever thing you find, if you find somebody else in that group, there's going to be something that doesn't match up.
I accept your statement.
Yes. So that's really the basis of what I'm saying here. I'm not saying, I don't propose that every person looks alike, but I do propose that groups, as we think of them in these constructs, they don't match up. there's no science that backs that up or supports that. Biologically, there is no biological indicators other than general things like melanin or not melanin, and even that is like gradation. So that's not something we can't say that, like we can say H2O is water any place in the universe, wherever we find that. We cannot make such a description with people. So if we can't make such a description for groups of people, then to me, the descriptions that we have don't have meaning, because if you have a word but you cannot define it, then what's the point of the word? For example, if I say there's a Black person and I say, well, what do all of the Black people have that no other people have? If you can't say that, then how do we know that there's a Black person, except each individual decides, or that individual decides. And then before we can say, meet that Black person in the market, we need to have a conversation with that person who says, I'm a Black person, but at that time, you know who they are. So what I'm saying is, once we decide that there are these categories, then we have to have a definition. Once we have a definition, we can proceed at least to have a conversation about it. If we don't have a clear definition, but it's vague, then what we're left to do is still say, well, what is it that I mean when I say a Black person? What is it, if I say I'm a Black person, whether you say it's ethnicity or whatever it is, when I say I'm a Black person, what do I want that to mean to everyone who hears that statement? And how is that different from profiling? And then if we ask everyone else, okay, do you agree with that? If you call yourself Black, or do you agree that that's what a Black person is? Is there a consensus?
Okay, so I guess we'll just go around saying we are melanin enriched folks. Now that means that Jennifer needs to go and get her melanin content measured so that she can say what percentage melanin that she's carrying, because unlike the redhead, I'm sorry, redhead, I forgot your name. Carolyn. You know, there's a difference there, folks. There's a difference there. As a geneticist, I looked, I saw you guys, and I immediately registered. There is a difference here. I did not say there are two white women. It was just that, hey, isn't that interesting? Look at Jennifer. And I ascribed nothing about their color or percentage of melanin to their character. But that's me. And that's where I would like the world to be. That we see, acknowledge, and say, wow, and then move on. You know, because to me, every variation on the theme of humanity is a wow. It's a wow. Look at the combination that has given rise to Lawrence. Wow. Isn't that interesting? Would you like to meet his parents to see what happened there? Of course, you know, anyway.
But, you know, I think sometimes we conflate or put together the differences between people and peoples. Okay, so to say that that person looks like that person, okay, maybe we say they look different. To ascribe even character to a person, to me, that's not objectionable if you actually have done the research and shown that there, you know, here's what this person is. This is how they're predictably likely to react in that situation. This is what I know of their history. But if you start to extrapolate from that, groups of people like Lawrence is dark and he has this characteristics, therefore people who are dark have those characteristics. Now that's where I think that we're talking about race, and then that's where it falls apart for me.
Okay, I totally agree with you. Just because Jennifer looks the way she does, and maybe somebody else would look like Jennifer, and I say, hey, they look really the same. Like they're from the same tribe originally, you know, but that doesn't mean that they're the same in character or otherwise. So yes, the group labeling is where we have the problem, because we ascribe the group labeling to behavior or any other things, you know. So, and that's not allowable. Just as with sex, males, females, throwing them in groups and then saying like all females behave a certain way. You know, you have to sit down, you have to be quiet, you don't ask questions and so forth. Those feminine, so-called feminine attributes, even when you find it with men, it's not appreciated. The poor guy is an introvert. He wants to just sit there and be quiet and not do anything. And all of a sudden he's getting labeled that he is effeminate. Now, that's okay if we understand that that's not a negative. But you see, feminine ways are negative for men and male ways are negative for females. And that's a whole other story. And I see 12:05, so I should say goodbye and thank you very much.
Well, I have to say, I really appreciate your input, Fedora. I think without you, we wouldn't have had a discussion. Somebody had to say something, you know, so I really appreciate you pushing back. You know, I never have a problem with someone saying, hey, you know, I don't see it that way. I got this other data that says this, you know, and I always feel like I should be able to defend my position. And given another format, I certainly could take you to the line and links and all those other things to support my position, but we would use a lot of time that I would prefer to like just have people to interact. That
Plus,
said,
you would lose.
But if you want to have another format, I've had a challenge out for 30 years for somebody to have a formal debate with me.
Debate's on.
Okay,
Debate's on.
You have to decide what we were debating first.
I want a piece of that. You have to have it an open public forum.
Yeah.
You know, with a lot of time in there. Invite some other, you know.
You can have it a week.
Okay, I'm going now.
I can give you a bibliography so that you can like, look before, so we don't have to say, well, okay, we'll wait and go and read, you know, spend.
We'll set it up on the other people, not on the people's time. We can chat about how this is going to be run, but the debate is on.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I still want to be there, but I do have one thing to say about the whole thing. The perception, if she's got red hair and then has brown skin because she tans really well, I don't know about that.
He doesn't.
Made up. And she tans really well, then does that put her in the classification of something other just by looking? So
well, that's a genetic class.
What both of you are saying, and I would just chime in and say, when people get to the point where they are accepting of anyone that stands on 2 feet other than Bigfoot, but you should accept Bigfoot too, you never know. When we get to the point where we are accepting of everyone, then the only reason to put people in classifications is maybe sizes so that they can be able to go through particular doors. And when we get to that point, then it won't matter. But at this particular point in time, it matters greatly whether it has to do with businesses, whether it has to do with a whole bunch of different things. Look at what happened when they had the tall athlete that was the basketball player from China. People lost their minds. They absolutely went crazy. So when we get to the point where we can accept everyone, then things will be a little bit different. But we're always going to have classifications, and they are going to be by outward appearances. They're going to be by tests with IQ tests, not unless everybody is given one that's for people who are visually motivated and audio. I visually, audio, everything for me. And then that still might not come up as me being a very, very intelligent person, because then there's that squirrel. So when you are able to put it all together, and then throw the filters out and just say, well, I just want to find out if you're going to fit through this door because it's only 6'2", and that's the only reason, then we will be there. And I have no idea how you're going to do that with 9 billion people on the planet, but we could start with ourselves. And I don't have to look at Carolyn and go, oh man, what happens if she gets a tan?
Yeah. Well, let me say that to your point, Naima, that the way that we believe that people are grouped, that is something that was programmed. People decide that and they sold that to us, and they support it by lots of things that they do. For example, who gets it up until recently, who was in newspaper articles that were positive and who were in newspaper articles that were negative, who were in advertising and who weren't, who could even get a patent, because you didn't want those people, you didn't want any evidence to show that people who don't look like us could do anything except just be under our control. They need to, because they can't take care of themselves. You take the continent of Africa, had been feeding themselves for over 1 million years, or at least as far back as human, not maybe 1 million, but certainly 100,000. And suddenly they can't feed themselves? It's crazy, But if you can project that they somehow need us, even though we're taking all the food and eating it in Europe, that's why they don't have no food there, then it can look like you need to be in control.
You want to repeat that?
No, it's like, okay, so all I'm saying is the construct, everybody is a victim of it. And the construct is there to divide us, okay? And it is a superficial construct, and it's based on nothing. So if somebody gives me a biological, reproducible evidence that there is a difference between this group and that group, then I'm willing to have that conversation, okay, to see what it is that they found, because I haven't found it. But until then, I will say that yes, there are differences between each individual, but no groups that I've ever heard of have all of them have the same thing, and nobody else has that. So therefore I say people can't define race. So if you can't define the principal term on which you're having a discussion, to me, you can't have a discussion because you have not agreed on terms. That is the complexity of what we're dealing with. Now, where do we go from here? I would say that since we were sold this, we can't unsell it. Just like every time, if you see you see a lot of things changing now because you see people who are included now that were not included before. I have friends who were Chinese, and their parents would not let them be like movie and acting careers and artist careers. They could not do that because that was not the image that they were supposed to have, right? Only recently have those people been able to actually get on the screen. It started with people, ironically, like Bruce Lee, It started like people like that. But before that, being an Asian was really hard to get a part. Everybody else could play an Asian, but you couldn't play anybody else if you were an Asian. Or you know what I mean? So what I'm saying is like those kind of things, it's like, here's this universal people, but then everybody else is like ethnics. They're like some kind of sub thing. So I guess I'm saying like, no, all of us are ethnics, to the same degree. And so, so if you say like, or the Naima's case where a point that she brought up with red hair, there are people who are very, very dark, much dark, like dark like my shirt, and they have red hair. I know, I've met them, and they didn't dye it. I've met people who are this dark who have blonde hair, and they didn't dye the hair. It was blonde and it was straight. So these classifications that we think we can make, I would argue that we cannot make them, and we just sort of round off the edges so we can jam that square peg in the round hole. And then we make we extrapolate behavior, et cetera, from that. And that's what causes what we call racism to me. Right? It's the basis of racism. I will make one last statement. The belief in race is the cornerstone of racism. If nobody believes, not just say I don't see color, I'm just saying, if you don't believe that there's race, there cannot be racism. And as long as you do believe in race, we will have racism, because people cannot make a distinction without a difference. And so they will make up the differences, and then those differences will be fake. And that's why we have racism. I hope you'll join us next time and we'll crazy discussion. Thank you everybody for joining us, and same time, same station. Next week we'll be introducing something else.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Okay, bye.